Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Cutter Consortium webinar, entitled Agile Business Intelligence, Raising Your Business Intelligence Baby to Adulthood, featuring Ken Collier. My name is Chris Getz. I'd like to first begin with a few details about our WebEx environment. To maximize the viewing screen, click on the Maximize button, which you'll find in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. It's the third button from the left, with the small red arrow pointing up to the right. When your screen is maximized, a toolbar will appear at the right. The chat and QA features are easily accessed from this toolbar. Though you are in a listen-only mode, you may submit questions at any time by using the Q&A or chat tools. If you require audio assistance, press *0. Should you experience technical difficulty, dial 866-779-3239. Today's speaker is Ken Collier. Ken is a senior consultant with Cutter's Business Intelligence practice and our Agile software development and project management practice. He brings more than 15 years of experience in advanced computing and technology to Cutter, with expertise in data warehousing, business intelligence, software engineering, and Agile methods. In today's webinar, Ken will demonstrate how Agile Business Intelligence, the application of Agile values, principles, and practices to data warehousing, data mining, and other BI development efforts, will enable you to treat BI system development like healthy child rearing. You will discover how using Agile Business Intelligence is a system which, from inception to maturity, is continuously exposed to stakeholders, allowing your development efforts to align with your stakeholders' vision. So without any further delay, Ken, we turn this over to you.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thanks, everyone, for carving time out of your busy schedules. I know this is a tough time of year to squeeze things in. Hope everyone's got their shopping done and ready for holidays. Let's go ahead and get started. As Chris mentioned, I'm Ken Collier. I'm a senior consultant with Cutter Consortium. I'm going to leave this up for just a moment. My email address is on there in case anyone has any questions. I'd be happy to answer later on if this does come up. Well, I'm going to try something. I haven't done this little informal survey via webinar, but I'd like to get everyone engaged early. And we're going to try using the raise hand button, which I hope you can all see on your screen. Raise your hand if you have been involved in an IT project that's budgeted at about $10 million, plus or minus, or even upward from there. Just out of curiosity, let me give it a moment here to see. Yeah, I'm gonna probably have to relay some numbers to you, and this is again, it's an informal kind of gut check. So it looks like a few of you have raised your hands. Let's decrease that dollar amount a little bit. Say $5 to $10 million projects, or $5 million and up, fairly significant size projects. Okay, so it looks like we've got about 20 or 30% of you have been involved in those kinds of projects. Now the numbers are increasing. Again, I'm not sure what you see on your screen, but I'll just kind of relay this to you. So on the order of 25% of you have been involved in projects. Now let's take a look at, and I'm going to ask you to leave your hands raised. If you just leave them raised, and I'll ask you to pull them down. If these projects had one or more of the following characteristics, if any one of these projects that you may have been involved in exceeded project budget, if that happened, lower your hand. If you've been involved in a project that was completed later than planned, lower your hand. If the user or the customer community was somehow unsatisfied with the outcome, lower your hand. If the result was missing some expected features. Now, at this point, there are no more hands raised, just to kind of relay our little informal survey. I think you can see where I'm headed with this. Most all of us in the IT and software development community have been involved in projects that have not gone well on one or more of these fronts. Either they were delivered late, they exceeded budget, users, customers were unhappy, expected key features were missing or not completed, or maybe performance requirements were not met. In in a broader study of IT projects, including business intelligence systems, ERP installations, other integration projects, approximately 53 of these projects fail at some level. Now failure, we need to probably define failure, but I want to sort of couch today's talk under the heading of how do we try to avoid this high percentage of project failure. It's frustrating, it's painful. Most all of us on this call have experienced some pain related to IT projects, either failing or struggling. I define project success as projects that are completed on time, within budget, and really most importantly that satisfy the needs and expectations of your customer community or your user community and meet performance expectations. These are the marks of project success. I don't think I'm telling you anything new here. However, many of the companies I work with talk to me about projects that were ultimately successful but not without a lot of pain, suffering, rebudgeting, those kinds of things. And I suspect you've been involved in those. So a project may ultimately be launched and successful, but if it's painful and it's a struggle and it's more costly than expected, I consider those project failures to some degree. So given that sort of baseline, let's talk a little bit about our IT projects and our traditional way of doing business. Suppose, and I'm going to use the metaphor of child rearing. This is something hopefully many of you can relate to because you either have children or were a child at one time, or maybe still are. Suppose we raised our children like we build our BI systems today, or have traditionally built our BI or IT systems. We might spend the first 4 years defining what the child will look like as an adult. So we might do requirements analysis up front. We'll spend the next 5 years designing a plan to raise our children. Then we might spend the next seven years actually implementing that plan. So now we've got a design and a plan. We'll implement the plan, and then we'll do a little QA near the end. We'll spend the next 2 years testing to make sure that they've turned out like we planned during that first 4 years of definition phase. Finally, we might do a beta release. We'll let them interact a little bit with a hand-picked set of other young adults and just make sure that they integrate well with society. How's this feeling so far as a way to raise children? At about 21 years of age, we'll launch them into production, let them loose on the world. Well, if you think about that, you might see a result something like this. And by the way, I have nothing against piercings and tattoos, but I thought this picture might reflect what our child might look like if we built our child or we raised our child like we build our IT systems. Probably has some undesirable characteristics. Might not be what we really wanted, might not be what we expected. And our vision from the first 4 years has probably changed over the child rearing years, and ultimately may not be accepted by others. And I think you see the metaphor here. So let's take a look at an alternative. What if we built our BI or IT systems like we raised our children? And what I'd like to do in today's talk is sort of walk through the building of a BI system from the point of view of stages of childhood development into adulthood, and look at the mappings of some characteristics of raising children onto building BI systems and IT systems. And I'm using this term BI and IT somewhat synonymously. Today's talk is about business intelligence, and in particular, I do a lot of BI and data warehousing development. However, I believe that what I'm talking about extends beyond just BI systems to include ERP installations, integration, CRM systems, other kinds of IT projects that you might undertake. So just consider that through the talk, how these might apply to other projects that you're engaged in as well. So here are some characteristics and considerations that we should look at in the metaphor. One is physical growth. So we're interested in watching our children grow physically. We're also interested in watching our systems mature into complete working systems. We're interested in our children's abilities, and we're also interested in our systems capabilities and working features. We're interested in our children's ability to interact socially and be successful in social groups and communities. Similarly, we want our systems to provide good user accessibility. We want our systems to interact well with the user community and provide what they need. We're interested in our children's ability to adapt and change to the feedback that they get from their environment. Similarly, we need to be able to respond to the feedback that we get from user community, customer community, and others to adapt to changing needs of the business. We want our children to achieve a level of independence. Similarly, we want our systems to achieve a production readiness, an ability to stand on their own and be value-added contributors to the business. And finally, we care about our children accepting responsibility as adults. Similarly, we want our systems to assume responsibility for organizational functions. We want our systems to play a supporting role and be trustworthy. So those are the kinds of characteristics I'm going to use as we talk about this metaphor. I'm going to speak for about the next 30 minutes, and I'm going to move fairly quickly through this slide deck, and then we'll take questions and answers for the last 15 minutes. Please continue adding your questions to the queue, and then I'll address those questions at the end. So let's start with infancy. So as we kick off our BI as we kick off our development of our BI systems, let's look at what those first few years might look like, or first few months might look like. First of all, on the dimension of physical growth, a child is at this point is whole and complete. They've got all 10 fingers, all 10 toes. They probably have limited motor control. Similarly, our BI system, at this point we have a conceptual architecture. We have a general set of requirements. In an Agile Business Intelligence environment, we don't invest a tremendous amount upfront in defining a detailed, refined set of requirements that are expected to be true at the end of the project. Instead, we focus on a general set of a general vision, scope, and boundary, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. A child at this point has some basic abilities. They can eat, they can breathe, they can do some of those basic necessary functions. Similarly, our BI system at this point has basic working features. We want to expose working features to users as early as possible in the Agile development cycle so that we can begin to get feedback and align with what users are looking for. Social interaction. At this point, our infant has very limited interaction, primarily with mom and dad. Similarly, we want to release our working features to a few select users. We want to keep the user community moderately small, but still representative of the broader community. So we want to demo to a few users who can provide us valuable guiding feedback. Adapting. Our infant is rapidly learning new things, a lot of growth every day. Similarly, our systems should be experiencing a lot of growth and adaptation to user feedback and software changes on a daily basis. We want to be able to show the continuous rapid growth of an early infant system. At this point, infants are not very independent. They require constant care. We need to keep our Agile BI system in a controlled environment. We want to make sure that it's working at a production level, but it's not yet in production or even available for widespread use. Accepting responsibility is not even really a consideration for infants, and similarly, we want our BI system to work in a demo setting for the primary purpose of eliciting feedback. We're not expecting it to take over any business responsibilities or functions yet. Let's talk a little bit about how we get here, and I'm going to couch our discussion in terms of guiding principles, Agile guiding principles, and specific practices. So achieving infancy, the guiding principle is getting off to the right start. And there's several practices for doing this. One is very first and foremost, building the right project team, project community. Business intelligence in particular is challenging because it requires such a specialized and varied set of skills. You need ETL developers, you need web application developers if you're going to develop in a web-based environment, which most BI systems today are. You need database developers, you need DBAs, and that list goes on. It's challenging. We need to make sure that we have the right people, and there is no substitute for having the right skill set and talented people. We need to distinguish between the critical members of the team, the people who are essential to the success of a project, the people who are essential, and then I'm using this term non-essential, and I need to come up with a better term, but these are the people who have a vested interest in the project, but they are peripheral to the day-to-day or week-to-week course setting or feedback loop that is part of an Agile project. I'm going to talk a little bit about the project community. Project chartering is an important practice in Agile development, and it includes the project community getting all the right people together, not just the technical team, but the right bigger project community together, and creating a collaborative environment for project visioning and the definition of the boundaries and scope of the project. So these are all essential kicking off practices that we use to make sure that the project community is aligned with the scope, the vision, and the boundaries of the project. Part of that chartering process includes release planning, where we do some initial requirements gathering with the understanding that our requirements are not going to be complete and they're subject to change. And we're okay with that. We get a sufficient amount of requirements to move forward, and then we continue collecting and refining those requirements over the life of the project. We do time box scheduling, which I'll talk about a little more deeply later. And we work in short development iterations, generally 1 to 3 weeks. Some iterations can go as long as 4 weeks, but I don't advise going any longer than 4. My development teams generally prefer 2-week iterations. So that seems to be a good balance between the ability to to show working features frequently and still get something meaningful done. Here's a model of how the project community interacts. This is one of several variations, but essentially you have a technical community with an Agile project manager that's the interface to the world. The technical community collaborates closely with the customer or the user community, and the BI manager or the product manager or the business analyst, whatever term you use in your organization, interfaces very closely with the Agile project manager, but we still want to have collaboration between the technical community members and the user community members. There's also a stakeholder community. These are the business stakeholders that view the success of the project that you're working on as materially contributing to the running of the business. So these are the people who are going to be the active users of the system, and these are the people who are paying attention to the return on investment of the project. We want an executive sponsor or maybe a review board that interacts with both the user community and technical community frequently to make sure that all the vision and the boundaries and the scope is all aligned. We want frequent collaboration, frequent feedback, frequent releases, and we do requirements gathering across this collaborative line. Now we're moving into toddlerhood. So in the toddler phase, let's take a look at physical growth. At this point, our child has better coordination. They probably still fall down a lot. That happens. Our BI systems are immature and simple. It's okay to have some rough edges. We'll talk a little bit more about production quality versus slick, refined working features in a little bit. So at this point, our BI system has some working features that have been exposed to users, and we still want to show users those, get feedback, but users need to be okay with the fact that there are possibly going to be some rough edges. At this point, our child has more abilities than they did as an infant. They play now. They explore their small world. They have some basic communication skills that are rapidly increasing. Our system similarly has more working features. Those features may still be immature features. At this point, we may use some what are called mock objects. If you haven't heard of mock objects, it's a practice that the technical community uses as a way to separate the flow of live production data or a working database from the development of a system. So we might use a mock object to temporarily represent a real database or an operational system as a way to show what will work when everything is stitched together. Mock objects allow us to build the staging database or the presentation database separate from the application and then stitch those things together later. Our child at this point is beginning to play with others, maybe a small play group or a few select other children. Similarly, we will expose our system to a broader set of users. Again, we want to keep this set of users to a fairly controlled group who understand what we're trying to do and how we're trying to build our Agile system. We want visibility for the purpose of feedback. We don't want users to think that they're seeing the end result and become disillusioned because there are some rough edges. Our child at this point is rapidly learning on an hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis. Similarly, our software is changing on a daily basis. We should be able to see evidence that progress is being made on an Agile data warehouse or business intelligence system. At this point, a child still doesn't have very much independence. They've got a little bit more freedom. We'll let them run around the backyard while we sit on the patio and watch, or play in the sandbox while we oversee their play. Our BI system, we want to increase the exposure, but we're still maintaining a controlled freedom for our BI system as well. And finally, our responsibility, our toddler has some basic tasks, maybe picking up their toys or something like that. Our BI system, we might have an expanded demo environment that is available to this select set of users. Here are some of the practices that we use to accomplish that level of development. We practice, the principle is iterative and evolutionary development, and this is really what makes Agile Agile. We're developing in very short iterations, and we're evolving the solution to align with the needs of the business. And often those needs, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, often the needs of the business are not necessarily what you hear at the very beginning of a project. The needs emerge over time and as users have an opportunity to explore and experiment. So we work in frequent short iterations. Each iteration results in an architecturally complete data warehouse. So I want to really emphasize this. We're not building a prototype. Now I'm using data warehouse as our example here. You can map this to other BI projects that you have, but the data warehouse is probably the most common of the BI systems that we are involved in. We have a lot of user collaboration and feedback during these short iterations. My good friend Luke Homan likes to talk about these features being whole and complete but immature, and you know, he uses the analogy like a baby. Our features have all 10 fingers, all 10 toes, all working parts, but they're not yet mature, and so you know, this supports my metaphor of child rearing. We're developing features, not functions. Our technical tendency is to think about underlying functionality. And if you think about, this is a sort of typical Kimball-style data warehouse architecture. And if you're familiar with data warehousing, you know that the bulk of the work, 90% of the work, is really in this part of the world. This is pulling data from your operational source systems, handling the data cleansing activities that go on in your staging database, developing the ETL processes to transform that data, to merge that data, and to load it into your data warehouse repository. And this is a tremendous amount of work. And if you've ever been involved in a data warehousing project using traditional methods, you know that for many of the months that are at the beginning of a project, this is where the work is going, and there's nothing out here for users to look at until this work is done. Traditional development styles, we tend to say, well, we need to do all of our rigorous data modeling and validation in our staging database for merging and purging and cleansing and those kinds of things. We need to do all of our data modeling in our warehouse repository, and we have to get all of that done correctly before we can begin to expose features to users, which translates into users not seeing any working features until possibly 6, 8, 10 months out into the project. So what we're going to look at is a method where we look at feature spikes. So instead of the thought of having to build an entire staging data model and populate that model with live data or development data, we're going to look at a user feature, and that feature at this user application layer maps into the requirements for the data needed to support that feature coming out of the data access servers, the data needed to support the data access layer for that feature, the data needed from the staging database to support the warehouse repository, and so on, working backwards. So we have an architecturally complete feature, not just a working prototype that is mocked up. Feature has end-user value and needs to be demonstrable to users. It's generally skinny, but it's still architecturally complete. So it may deserve some maturity. It may need to put some shiny polish on it, but it is a working feature that shows value to customers or to users. We use the practice of barely sufficient modeling and barely sufficient design as we do this. So as our development unfolds, we begin to expose more and more of these user features, and we spike on these things. And over time, we wind up and evolve to a comprehensive data model in the staging database, a comprehensive star schema in the warehouse repository. And what I'm not suggesting is that this just becomes an ad hoc data modeling exercise. What I'm suggesting is that this becomes a well-orchestrated and continuous refinement, revision, and adaptation of the data model that grows from conceptual architecture to detailed, refined architecture as we go along. So let's take a look a little bit at the process, the practices that we use in the Agile process. First of all, we have our two key communities that I pointed out earlier. We have the user community who establishes the vision, and we have our technical community that is the people that are going to implement to that vision. So we want to make sure we've got the right vision and the right people to complete that vision. The user community determines and prioritizes the value, the features that are of value, which are the highest value features and which are the things that have the greatest business impact. Those value priorities drive the technical community to develop these feature spikes that I just spoke of. These feature spikes are iterative, they're incremental, and they're evolutionary. This is what makes this Agile. So a feature spike today may be whole and complete but immature, so we continue to iterate and evolve to a more mature and more accurate working feature, and this is true of all of those working features or capabilities. If you've got an enterprise architecture, that enterprise architecture dovetails with our process in that the enterprise architecture constrains those feature spikes and the approaches and tools and methods that the technical community is using. So we've got the enterprise architecture establishes boundaries, guidelines, and constraints so that our working data warehouse or business intelligence system will align well with the rest of the enterprise application architecture. Working features are exposed through this iterative, evolutionary, incremental development, and those working features generally are exposed in 1 to 3 week iterations and are reviewed by the user communities for acceptance or feedback. So a user community can either reject the feature outright, they can accept the feature as done and complete, or they can accept the feature but request revision or refinement. So those are kind of the broad three categories that user feedback fall into. As the business needs and the business culture evolves, the requirements of the system are likely to change. And if you've ever been involved in a project that's spanned a year to 2 years, and there are many IT projects that typically run 18 to 24 months, you know that the business and culture, the business needs change and the business culture changes through reorganizations, through refocusing strategies or tactics, and all of those things can affect the project requirements. Those changing requirements are adapted to by the technical community, and we want to be able to quickly, by doing these short iterations, we want to be able to quickly adapt and change to meet those changing needs of the business. Okay, our preschooler. I'm going to start moving fairly quickly here because I think you can see where I'm headed with this. At this point, our preschooler has much better coordination. They're probably throwing and catching. They're doing those kinds of things. Our BI system now has a deepening architecture. Our architecture has moved from being a conceptual architecture to being a much more detailed, refined architecture, and it continues to evolve and refine. Our child is now running and jumping and playing. They can talk to us. They can tell us what they need, what they want. They can understand jokes. Our BI system is maturing. We have new features. Now we've got a collection of features and possible broader capabilities. We've now replaced our mock objects with actual live database connectivity, or maybe I shouldn't say live database, but at least development database that represents live database, but real database connectivity here. Our child is now playing with friends and has some freedom to go out in the backyard and play. We're now releasing to users, to a broader set of users. At this point, we're probably releasing to users for the actual decision support and usage that they expect to use the eventual production system for. We probably still don't have a system in production, but it's not uncommon to actually put something into pre-production at this point with these working features. Our child is adapting. They're learning new social rules. They're learning how to interact with their friends. Our system, through the feedback from the users, we're continuously adapting to the real needs of the users as opposed to what the users thought they wanted or thought they needed at the beginning of the project. Our child has more freedom. Similarly, our system has greater, broader user experimentation. We're giving the user possibly some real live data to work with and experiment and explore with. And we might have a controlled release to a broader set of users with possibly live data or some simulation of live data in here. At this point, our guiding principle is an early focus on quality. One of the Agile principles is that we always want to be producing or creating production quality software. Even as immature and unfinished as our project is, we want to always know that it is of shippable quality or production quality. Friend Josh Karievsky likes to call this done. A feature is done when it passes all of the development tests and the developers believe that it meets the acceptance criteria. It's done when the users say it meets their needs and it provides the value that they expect. A working BI system should always be production ready, even if you don't intend to put it into production. We're going to use test-driven development. This is a principle that's been used very successfully in the straight software application development. It's a very effective technique where we develop our test cases, our acceptance criteria first, and then we build the code or we build the components of our business intelligence system so that they pass those tests. And if you think about it, this makes sense. The requirements define what the test cases should be. The test cases actually become the rigorous precise specification for what the software must do. And if we build the code so that it passes those tests, we're effectively building to spec. We're not building any more than needs to be built. If we forget some test cases, we can add some test cases in and then modify the code to pass those new tests. We build a little bit, we test a little bit, and actually I probably should have flipped this around and said we test tiny and we build tiny. Write a little bit of test case, we build a little bit, we make sure that that little bit is passing the test, and then we move on and we continue this cycle as part of our 1 to 3 week iterative development process. We're testing each stage in the architecture. So that means that unlike traditional software, let's say web application development, we need to have tests for our ETL layer that moves data from operational systems into staging. We need to have tests that test our ETL code for moving data from staging into the presentation database. We need to have test cases at the cube layer if we're using an OLAP model. We need to have test cases in the web application itself. And then we need to have test cases for our data, the static data that sits in both the staging and the presentation databases. And you can apply what I just said to a CRM system or an ERP system or other IT systems as well. Essentially, from the bottom to the top of the architecture, we want to have testing. And this is what makes Agile Business Intelligence complex and challenging relative to my friends in the straight-up software development world who are able to think about everything in Java or in C# or in whatever the language is. So we use an automated testing framework. So we need to build and establish an automated test framework. Here are some of the tools that are on the open source market for testing that apply to data-oriented and data-centric systems. I do a lot of work with SQL Unit. OUnit is specifically for Oracle. So if you're an Oracle shop, this may be very relevant to you. DB Unit, T-SQL Unit is very specific to Transact SQL and Microsoft SQL Server. And the FIT framework is a Ward-Cunningham framework that is an integrated testing environment for user acceptance testing. We want to strenuously apply these testing frameworks, and this automated testing and test-driven development they become our development processes, not our QA processes anymore. So as opposed to traditional methods where we typically wait for QA until late in the project cycle, and we think of QA as a separate activity, in Agile development and Agile Business Intelligence, test-driven development and automated testing are an integral part of our development procedure. So QA is embedded within development. We want to focus early on risk and uncertainty. Not only do we want to drive business value early in the project, we also want to drive risk and uncertainty early in the project. Most projects have risks of some sort or another, and DeMarco and Lister both say in their Waltzing with Bears book, if a project doesn't have risk, it's probably not worth doing. It probably doesn't add enough sufficient value. Jeff DeLuca, who is the father of feature-driven development, his quote is that he likes to break the back of the project as early as possible. If a project's going to fail, let's make it fail early so we can get on with other things. On the other hand, if the project's not going to fail, we've now gotten the risk and the uncertainty out of the way so that we can run to the finish line. I'm going to move very quickly through these next few slides. So our elementary child is now bigger and stronger, and again, you can see kind of the iterative growth of our system. We have a more robust architecture, not yet feature complete, but our features, we've got some very mature features in the system now. We've got very powerful features. We have a lot more systems integration with our BI, between our BI system and other systems. We've got a widening set of users that we're providing access to the system for the purpose of feedback. We're continuing to adapt to this feedback. This is not new to this stage of development. We have controlled deployment, and we want, at this point, because we're doing automated test-driven development, we've got production quality software. We've got some very mature, powerful features, even though we're not feature complete yet. So you can see that our our baby is growing into a young adult, or growing toward a young adult. At this stage in development, our focus, our guiding principle is evolutionary design. Many data-oriented developers, either database developers or application developers that deal a lot with databases, ask me the question, well, don't you need to have a complete settled data model before you start developing to that data model? And the answer is no, you don't need to have a completely refined and finalized and frozen data model any more than you would expect to have a finalized and frozen working system. Sorry, I jumped ahead there. And so what we want to look at is modeling to the intent or to the level that we need. So we're going to do evolutionary modeling, incremental design and modeling. Scott Ambler talks about modeling in this context. We want to model with a purpose. We want to make sure that we understand our models and that our models support our immediate needs. We don't want to maintain temporary models. If we need temporary models to get the job done, that's fine, but we want to get rid of those and replace them with actual working software as quickly as possible. If we have models that need to be contractual in the sense that everybody, making sure that everyone is building to the same thing, then we will formalize those models, but we won't invest a huge amount of upfront time in refining the model beyond its current necessity. And so that means that our data models will iteratively and evolutionary and evolve to where they need to be, but we'll continue using good guiding, good principles and techniques for doing good data models. We take a barely sufficient approach. We want to do the minimum, but we don't want to fail to do the minimum required to expose the working features that we want to show to users. Sometimes that minimum requires a lot, but essentially this barely sufficient concept means that we don't want to gold plate our efforts. So we want to do just what's necessary to move the ball forward, to get the feedback that we're looking for so that we can refine and adapt. Now we're at the preteen stage, and at this point our BI system, our architecture is deep, and it's now improving and being refined through iterative development. Our features are maturing, and we have many, many accepted features at this point. We now have a pattern of users reviewing features and giving us the nod of approval that features are done. We have periodic user updates. We also want to periodically update the stakeholder community or the management community so that all changes in the vision are continuously realigned. We have continuous refinement cycle. We now have a live system demo that we may have now exposed a live system demo to the broader world of users so that they can begin to see what's about to be launched, because we're now moving close to production launch. We've got reliable data quality in the system at this point, and all of our mock objects at this point probably have been replaced by either real data or development data that represents live data. Excuse me. The guiding principle at this point is frequent user collaboration. We don't want to lose sight of the fact that our users give us valuable feedback, and often we do this through lo-fi user interface prototypes. So because user features and what users care about are exposed at the application layer, and if you think about this, even though roughly 80 to 90% of the work in building a business intelligence system is in the back-end mechanics and data hookups, excuse me, really the value is only visible on that surface layer, that top 10 to 20%. So we develop lo-fi user interface prototypes, and this is actually a snapshot from some work that my team, I'm working on a project with an Agile Business Intelligence team currently, and this is a sample of what a lo-fi user interface prototype might look like. Sketched out, in this case it's sketched out on a notepad, and it was discussed with the user community and reviewed, and you can see it's very rough. It's not even, this person was not an artist. This was a developer that was sketching out some ideas and exploring those ideas with the user, and this became the guiding prototype for the development of working features that spiked through the architecture. It provides a rapid feedback mechanism. It provides a clear definition of the feature requirements because you can clearly see what needs to go on in here. And the value is not in the artifact itself. The value is in the conversation that we have with our users when we do these things. This discussion probably took a total of about an hour. And through the process of implementing this feature, there was a lot more continuous user collaboration and refinement. And what's now in the working system looks something like this. So you see a working set of features, and actually you could think of each of these boxes as a feature, or you could think of the whole thing as a feature, depending on the degree of complexity. So a user showcase shows working features, and we're demonstrating these working features to the select users for their feedback, and feedback is gathered and prioritized. Our BI system at the adolescence level is architecturally complete. We've got all the components hooked together now. We've got feature maturity, and we've got requirements priorities. We've got widespread visibility through our demo system, and we probably have a system that's in pre-production at this point. We're continuing to respond to change, and we have a beta release to a group of users that are actually using this for decision support. The emphasis continues to be on quality, and a principle for doing this is to establish development sandboxes. So each of the developers has their own little sandbox where they can explore and experiment, and then the technical community has an integration sandbox, and the integration sandbox is part of the build environment, and that build environment is a continuous integration. On a daily basis, we build the system, we look at it working, we run all of our automated tests, and if the tests break, then we carry that back to the development sandboxes for fixing. As code becomes more ready and more done, we promote it out to a demonstration environment and a test and QA environment where we continue running automated tests, and we provide demo access to users, and bug reports get fed back to the development community. And ultimately, we have this highly controlled deployment into a production system. This is from Ambler and Sidalage's book on refactoring databases, which if you haven't seen that, if you're in the IT community, this is really a must-read. It's an excellent book on how to improve the quality of any of your data-oriented systems. Okay, I see I'm running short on time, so let's just move on ahead here so that we can leave some time for questions and answers. Our young adults, we're time boxing our effort. I do want to speak briefly about this. Our time box delivery is a very key principle in development. And time box essentially means we're going to fix a project end date, and we're going to move toward a target scope. You can't fix both time and scope because often the scope exceeds time, and I'm sure you've experienced this. So we want to establish a collaborative agreement on the initial vision, but we need to frequently review and revise that vision in light of initial estimates changing, if we've underestimated the complexity of or uncertainty of something, or the likelihood that the priorities and the initial vision might change over time. So we want to be able to adjust this target scope, but our goal is to deliver when we say we're going to deliver. And when we ship software on time, even if it misses some of the lower priority features, users are much happier to see the high value features that they asked for in the time that they expected to see it. Finally, we're feature complete, and we are at production release. We've got our adult, and our adult is our working BI system is now done. And if there are features still on the backlog that we didn't have time to complete in our time boxed effort, there can be a business decision or a management decision to carry the project into another phase of development if those features still have high enough value. And that becomes a strategic decision that's budgeted separately and time-boxed and planned and run like an Agile BI project all over again. So ultimately, here's what you should expect from a well-run Agile BI project. Production quality working software throughout the life of the project, delivery on schedule, completion within budget because you've fixed the schedule or you've time-boxed the schedule and you've time-boxed the resources. You've continuously realigned to the changing business needs and expectations of your user community. The ultimate result or the end result may differ from the initial vision due to this adaptation, and that's okay, and it's generally more than okay. Users are happy about that ability to collaborate and provide feedback. Highest value features and highest risk features are achieved early. Because we produce high value features early, those are the ones that make it into the final production software. Lower valued features may remain on the backlog. Ultimately, here's a little testimonial. I'll give you just a moment to read this. But ultimately, what users tell us on the first day of a project become very different and reprioritized through the life of a project. And whether you've worked on an Agile project or a traditional project, you know that in the end, what users' expectations are likely to be somewhat or to very different from what they told you on the very first day or days of a project. So similar to a hurricane path, we're able to make plans, refine plans based on what we expect to see in the near future. We can estimate to a broader degree of uncertainty farther out, but we're really converging on the ideal end result or the target acceptable end result through an Agile BI project. So, question is, which BI child would you like to raise? Our graduate over here or our rock star over here? With that, I am sorry I ran this a little long, but I would like to take some questions at this point.
Yeah, that's right, Ken. Right now we will move into the Q&A session. If any of you would like to ask a question, please type it into the box in the Q&A section on your screen. And we do have a few questions here to start with. Ken, the first one would be, how does the complexity of the tools in a data warehousing technology stack, such as Oracle, Oracle Warehouse Builder, Oracle OLAP, Business Objects, etc., affect your ability to build an Agile data warehouse?
Yeah, this is actually one of the things that makes Agile Business Intelligence complicated. So when we do a business intelligence project like a data warehouse, we're dealing with the integration of multiple vendor products, and best case scenario is vendor products from the same vendor that hopefully integrate well together, but often that's not the case. So what I advocate is an iteration 0 at the beginning of a project where the technical community can focus its energy on installing and configuring those third-party tools and technologies that need to be in place in order for development to proceed. So all the software needs to be installed and talking to the other software so that we can then focus our energy during iteration 1 on feature spikes. Sometimes that iteration 0 can take as many as 4 to 6 weeks to procure software, to get it installed, to configure the development environment and all of that. And this is not uncommon. So that also gives us some time to think through the architecture and the data models at a conceptual level.
Okay. Next question is, how can you build a data warehouse in short iterations without having a completed data model before you start?
Well, I kind of spoke about that a little earlier. This is a challenge for a new Agile data warehousing team or an Agile Business Intelligence team. Thinking about features, it becomes a very different mind shift for new Agile developers, and often a data warehousing technical team believes that they need to have a complete comprehensive data model. And this is actually turns out not to be true, and it's actually pretty liberating to be able to say we have a conceptual data model that we will work to, but we will implement we will implement the details of that data model on an as-needed basis. So as a feature, as a user feature demands the need for refinement in the data model or in the architecture, then we do the refinement. Excuse me, I'm getting choked up here. So that it becomes a just-in-time sort of design process, and then we continuously review our data model and our architecture to make sure that we're applying best practices, and that we're not creating an ad hoc data model. That's not a good thing. So we need to continue using good data modeling practices and realign our data model.
Okay. Okay. I think we have time for one more question. What are some examples of data warehouse features that can be built in 2 weeks?
Well, let's see. I showed you the earlier. Actually, the screen I showed you earlier was a capability in a data warehousing application. Often, what my team will work on, or teams will work on, are things like specific metrics. As an example, you might be developing a finance data warehouse or data mart where the finance community cares about things like gross revenue, net profit, profit margin, those kinds of metrics. And so those might be viewed as the features that are going to be exposed in a working application. So you might present a multidimensional report that just produces those measures in the application. If those measures become complex, complex set of business logic, then maybe you choose one. So maybe in a first feature spike, we just expose gross revenue and gross revenue by customer, gross revenue by region, gross revenue by time, those kinds of dimensional attributes. And it's just one measure, and the user needs to understand that they're going to get more as time goes on. But that might be a typical data warehouse type of feature.
Okay. We've just about run out of time. On behalf of everyone at Cutter, I'd like to thank you for participating today. The next webinar in this series will be held on January 18th, featuring Cutter Senior Consultant Tom Welsh, who will be speaking on the subject of Web 2.0, an attitude or a technology. You can register for this and other upcoming webinars at Cutter's website. If you have further questions or comments about the content presented in today's webinar, we encourage you to call or email us. We'll be sending you an email message containing phone numbers and email addresses for additional questions or comments, as well as the URL where the on-demand recorded version of today's webinar is available. This concludes today's webinar. When you close your browser, please take a quick moment to complete our very short survey so we can get your feedback on today's webinar and any suggestions you might have for topics for future webinars. To end this call, simply hang up your phone. Once again, on behalf of Ken Collier and all of us here at Cutter, thank you for your participation today.
Thank you.